Hey guys, welcome back, it's Ripe again. In today's video, a neighbor parked his semi-truck on my property to block my driveway. He then sued me for towing him away, but I am absolutely in the right and I have never witnessed anyone as entitled as him before. Here is what happened. Let's dive right into the story. I've heard of bad neighbor stories before, but I've always been a skeptic of the drama. It was not until last month that I became a full believer on how awful people really could be. For some context, I live in the sticks, about an hour from the nearest town, with only one neighbor, which suits me fine as we originally moved out here for some peace and quiet after all. My neighbor, Dave, on the other hand, seemed to exist for the sole purpose of disturbing that peace. Dave was a middle-aged divorcee who lived alone after his family cut ties with him, staying busy by managing his own construction company. His headquarters was his own house. Out of pity, we tried to socialize with him when we initially moved in, but quickly found him to be an irritable, aggressive, and dangerously unpredictable person to be around, so we decided to avoid him as best as we could. Although we maintained as little contact as we could, that didn't stop Dave from picking fights over petty grievances. One week it was the size of our trash bins, another time it was that our hedges were cut a few inches too short for his liking. Basically, the neighbor liked to argue and would find any reason to do so. Naturally, this got old fast and I eventually started to hold my own against the guy. What had started as fairly sporadic disagreements escalated into a Cold War stalemate, maintaining an uneasy truce of mutual disgust. He didn't like me, I didn't like him, and that was fine for a while. Following my casual Saturday routine, I left very early for a trip into town for groceries. The morning was already a toasty 70 Fahrenheit and was only expected to get hotter as the day went by. So I made sure not to waste any time on my return journey as I watched the ice cream melt at a worrying pace. I breathed a sigh of relief as I navigated the familiar maze of country roads, knowing that I would soon be home and could take it easy. As I reached the end of my driveway, however, I found my path was blocked by a large semi-truck with the logo of Dave's Construction. I sat and waited for a minute as my patience wore thin in the heat. I honked my horn a few times, but only until I got out for a closer look did I realize that it was empty inside. I knocked furiously on his door, but was also left unanswered. An angry and dehydrated mind now started to wonder whether he had left it there intentionally as a prank or mild annoyance. Regardless of his intentions, I no longer had any option but to remove the vehicle by myself. By the time I had finished unpacking my groceries an hour later, my ice cream was a puddle that stained the trunk of my car. I considered looking for Dave again, but I was already in a foul mood and decided I wanted a little revenge instead. The tow truck arrived shortly after and spirited away the obstacle, leaving me finally with access to my own driveway. I gave the tow operator Dave's cell phone number and I posted a note about it on his door. I didn't think I owed him any more than that given the situation that he put me in. And of course, I was more than happy to land him with the $200 call-out fee on top of the $35 fine for taking it back from the impound. With that stressful situation behind me, I sat outside with a cold beer to unwind for the evening. A few hours later, I was getting ready to call it a night when I heard footsteps circling my house. I quietly rose from my chair to investigate the noise, but instead it came to me. A tall silhouetted man appeared in my backyard and marched towards me, ignoring my attempts to keep a distance from the stranger. As they came into reach of the fire, I realized it was actually my neighbor Dave and he was royally pissed off. Not that I needed help finding out. Dave stormed up to me, forcing me back into my chair as he loomed over me. He was furious that I had his truck towed away and demanded that I paid him the $235 back that I had cost him. I interrupted him mid-sentence as I rose to my feet to bite back at him. To my surprise, Dave had no idea why I had his truck moved and quote, "I can park it wherever the hell I like." This continued for a few minutes after before I realized talking to a brick wall would be more beneficial. With neither of us getting what we wanted in the end, I went back inside and he stormed off shouting about revenge and getting even. In the days that followed my neighbor's quest for revenge, I heard very little from him, which should have eased my nerves, but it worried me even more. One morning while I was in the office, I got a few doorcam notifications from a very stubborn visitor. I opened the app ready to seize Dave staring back at me, but instead it was a police officer. After explaining my absence, I hurried home for a conversation that was apparently better had directly. The officer explained that I was a named suspect in a case of vandalism in the area, though he kept the details vague. I knew there was only one other person nearby. According to the report, the victim's car had been attacked and graffitied, with a suspicious individual matching my description witness leaving the scene. While my alibi, being that I also lived alone, left gaps in my timeline after providing a copy of my doorcam footage, they left without showing concern. A tense afternoon passed as I wondered when or if anyone would contact me again for questioning. I called the local precinct for a status update, not expecting to hear much about it, but was pleasantly relieved to find the case had been closed and dropped. If he was gonna try and frame me, why didn't he wait until I was at home to do so? With his revenge foiled but his own stupidity, I expected that he would give up on the idea, and that would be that. When I opened a padded envelope from my mailbox a week later, mentioning details of a lawsuit, my stress levels hit the roof. I quickly got in touch with my lawyer to discuss the matter, arriving at his office 2 hours early because I was too worried to do anything else. After explaining the situation to him, he was able to ease my concerns and promised to handle the matter, leaving me slightly but not totally relaxed. I was less than thrilled with the idea of now having to wait a whole weekend before hearing back from him, though I did my best to keep myself occupied and out of sight. After a night of restless sleep, I dragged myself out of bed Monday morning and waited by the phone for his office to happen. I must have dozed off as I was later woken by a phone call. My lawyer had rang to tell me the lawsuit had been rejected by the court due to insufficient charges. I did not fully understand the details, but I was ecstatic nonetheless. Dave was out for blood, and I knew now he would not stop until he had it. This time I didn't hesitate, I would have to fight fire with fire. With my lawyer in agreement, I filed a counterclaim on the lawsuit against Dave for harassment and defamation. Despite my initial confidence, the legal battle was anything but smooth, and through the silver tongue of his 2-bit lawyer, it even started to look like Dave was gonna worm his way out of justice. Hoping to build on my case, I did some digging around. I found and hired a private detective who came to meet me in town a few days later with his results. The PI had uncovered a lot of dirt on my neighbor, adding tax evasion from his construction company into the mix. With all the evidence of his wrongdoings forced out into the open, the court had no difficulty in deciding their verdict. To my surprise, Dave's construction company is still thriving next door. I heard his estranged family may have taken over his success in his absence. They never went to support him in court, so I doubt they will visit him in jail either. I guess if he was not such a jerk, I might feel sorry for him. On the other hand, my driveway is now free and clear, and I have neighbors that know what happens if they try to mess with me. And here, Ripe Stars, if you still enjoy the neighbor stories, please don't forget to like the video and maybe even leave a comment, because that would help me tremendously. Thank you so much, and the next one is a petty revenge story. So this is another round we had with Clara, my dad's girlfriend, years ago. I wrote another story before, and to clarify, yes, she is awful, and yes, my dad was dumb to have her, but he had his issues. Me and my dad lived in different houses but the same property, so we had keys for each other's houses in case of emergency. My dad loved road trips, and when he was given money bonus at work, he planned the road trip and asked Clara to come with him. To celebrate the bonus and the trip, they planned to eat a concimento, which consists of boiling seafood, shrimps, clams, mussels and meats, chicken and pig, and some other things in white wine. So they took Clara's car and went to buy the things. That day I went out to spend a 3-day summer weekend in a friend's house, so I closed my house and then left. When I came back from my friend's house and opened the door, a stench smacked my nose. It came from the kitchen. I was sure that I left no garbage there, but when I looked at the can, there was a lot of seafood shells and other things stinking up everything. My first thought was Clara. I phoned Dad to ask him how was his trip, and he said that it was awesome and he would be returning in 4 days. I asked if he entered my house before leaving, and he said he hadn't. So then I took pictures of the stinking mess to be shown later. I spent a lovely evening cleaning and de-stinking my place and thought of something when I saw Clara's car in the yard. I entered Dad's house and saw Clara's car keys, so I went to the market and bought some of the same seafood I found in my garbage and proceeded to spread it in Clara's car. Some clams under the seats, some mussels in the trunk, some shrimps in the vents of the air conditioner of the car. Everything was left in a closed car under the sun for 3 summer days. A lovely 4-wheeled oven. When Dad and Clara came back and she opened her car, I just heard the screams of Clara blaming me for that. So I went straight to Dad, showed the pictures I had taken of what Clara left in my house, and then started laughing. Clara looked at Dad and he said to Clara, "You both are adults and you started this." To my delight, my dad told me that it was only after she cleaned the car insides that she turned on the air conditioner of the car and felt the wonderful smell of those hidden shrimp. Edit, I'll explain something that seems to be misunderstood. Dad and I lived in different houses in the same property. We were like across the street neighbors, but separated by a big yard. We had a big container for garbage in the yard. What Clara did was enter my house and leave the seafood leftovers in my kitchen's small garbage can. 3 days passed and that became a smelly mess. And the next one is a malicious compliance story. In 2018, I lived in Southern California while I was finishing up graduate school. Uber was more popular than ever, and given how spread out California is in general, it was an easy side hustle to shuttle people back and forth. However, I only did it for a little while because I'm not really the most patient person and eventually got tired of people's BS and attitudes. One of the common tactics for customers looking to screw a driver over was to cancel their rides in the middle of the trip to avoid paying the fare. They would often say how they did it accidentally and then ask me if I could just finish the trip since we were basically there anyway. This happened to me 3 times. The first 2 times I pulled over and told them to get out of my car, to which they complied. Albeit they called me several names and threatened to kill me. The 3rd time is the subject of this post. It was about 4:30 in the afternoon on a Tuesday when I decided to log on and catch some fares. Most people go into the office on Tuesdays and Thursdays and are looking to get rides home between 4 to 5 p.m. to beat the traffic. At this point, I should mention that I was living in San Diego. If you know the area, you would know that many people work in the city and live in the outer areas, because it is just cheaper. The day of the event, oh yes, it was an event, I picked up a middle-aged girl who was a student at the local community college downtown. Although she was in community college, I could tell she had money by the way she dressed and where she was going, La Jolla. She gets in my car and starts to make a conversation with me. I'm driving through town, and as I'm about to get on the highway, I hear the cancellation ding. I pull over to a parking lot and let her know that she cancelled the ride and I could not drive her until she rebooked it. She gave me the "it was an accident" excuse. I told her not a problem and just rebooked the route. Well, at this point, all those people I told you about earlier had just gotten off work and we were in what I call the power hour of maximum surge pricing. La Jolla is 25 to 40 minutes away from downtown San Diego, depending on the traffic. I looked and the trip would have cost her $70. She told me that she wasn't gonna pay that. I said fine and I asked that she exits my vehicle. She refused and told me to take her home like I was her chauffeur. At this point I was pissed and wouldn't have done it even if she gave me $100 cash. I didn't really need the money. So I asked her politely again. She refused. I had never really gotten to this point before. The other 2 people were guys and I would have had no qualms about yanking their ass out by force and beating them in the middle of the highway. However, that wouldn't have been a good look in this situation. I thought about going to the police given that we were 3 blocks from the headquarters, but I wanted her to feel the burn. Cue my malicious compliance. I asked her if she wanted a free ride and she suddenly perked up and said, "I knew you would come around. You're such a nice guy." I said buckle up and we got on Interstate 5. Here's the part where I tell you that San Diego is 16 miles from the Mexican border. I also keep my passport in my glove compartment because I did volunteer in Rosarito every so often. We were about 4 minutes into the ride when she asked where we were going. I turned around and told her, "I'm going to Tijuana and I'm glad you could join me. I hope you brought your passport." At first she didn't think I was serious, but by exit 4 she started to panic. I told her she was welcome to get out at any time, but she needed to make a decision soon because after we passed exit 1 there was no turning back. I also told her that I wasn't taking her back and well, she got the message and pleaded for me to pull over. I pulled over and dropped her off at the outlet mall in San Ysidro at the border. Just for craps and giggles, I checked the Uber rate from the mall to La Jolla and the cheapest rate was $87 for a pool ride. I didn't make any money that night, but that was the richest experience I had while being a rideshare driver. I stopped about 1 month later and sold my car. And yeah, ripe stars, I gotta say, props to OP, that was a brilliant revenge. Absolutely amazing. Either way, the next one is a coworker am I the jerk story. I know the title sounds bad, but hear me out. I, 28 male, have a female coworker, 26 female, who likes to flirt with all of the men at my work. My wife, 24 female, knows about her and how I feel. Coworker stays away from me unless it's work related because I shot her down a few times and told her on Monday if she didn't knock it off I would report her to HR. Well, yesterday that coworker found my wife's social media and messaged her telling her that I'm a creep and won't leave her alone and that I tried to pay her for sex. I was honestly disgusted by this. I ignore her existence unless it's work related and I couldn't believe the blatant lies she was telling. So today I go into work and have my phone in my hand and recorded our conversation when I confronted her. I did not show her face, the camera was facing the floor, so all that was shown was the shoes. After some back and forth, she admitted she was mad that I threatened HR and hoped my wife would force me to quit my job so I was not a problem anymore. So then I took the recording and the messages to HR and she was fired immediately. On the way out of the building, she screamed at me that I was an a-hole and a few other choice words for recording her without her permission and that she is suing me for it. Even a few coworkers said that I was wrong for it and I should have just showed HR the messages and how she is a single mom and I just cost her kids their livelihood. So Reddit, am I the a-hole? Edit, a lot of people seem very concerned about my age gap with my wife. Not that I owe anyone any explanation, but we met when my wife was 21, we got married after 2 months of dating because we hooked up and she wound up pregnant. I was in the military and stationed on the other side of the country and wanted an active involvement in my now daughter's life. If that makes me a bad person, so be it, I guess. So yeah, ripe stars, let me know in the comments what you think about this. Is OP the a-hole here or not? Someone on Reddit said, not the a-hole, if the genders were reversed everyone would be applauding you, always have proof and never go off he said she said when possible. Comment number 2, not the a-hole, I know there's a grey area here because in lots of places it's illegal to record without consent. However, she was out to get you and proved that she was willing to say whatever to get you out and I'm glad you got the recording of her saying so. Comment number 3, she cost her own kids her livelihood, as if hitting on you wasn't bad enough, but contacting your wife and potentially ending your marriage is hard. That's a bridge too far. From your title I was gonna say something else, but definitely not the a-hole. And now let's move on to the next story. It starts like this. Hey there, I will start by introducing myself before I get into the gritty details. I am Harris and together with my wife Sarah. We moved into this little HOA neighborhood roughly 2 years ago. A little while after we had finished unpacking, we got a newsletter saying that the local community had gotten together and asked the HOA to make a new rule to turn this area in an adults-only space, with residents now needing to be 55 years or older before being allowed into the neighborhood. I found it a bit strange, but at the time we did not think it would be a problem, because we moved in before the rule, so we thought we were generously allowed to stay. We have recently had a daughter and our family has grown. I cannot remember if we remembered the age rule or just did not think that they would be pedantic about it, but oh boy, were we wrong. Shortly after we announced the new baby to the neighborhood, we were sent 2 letters marked as urgent. One was from the HOA and another was from their attorney, which was another red flag to outline how serious and stupid this was. Both letters were the same, each read, as of September 26th, this neighborhood has elected to become a seniors-only community. And it has come to our attention that your house has broken that rule. As such, we kindly advise you to remove the infant from your home ASAP. We understand and apologize for any inconvenience. I stood by my mailbox dumbfounded as I read and reread the letter over and over again until Sarah came out to see what was going on. With the urgency they asked for, instead we wrote back a letter stating all the reasons we were not going to evict our baby and where they could stick their future requests for us to do so. The following week, after a tense silence, we got a new letter from their attorney to say we were being sued by the HOA for breaking their neighborhood rules. Knowing that the more eyes on this case the better, we petitioned to our neighbors for support and being pleasantly surprised to find that this new policy was not exactly unanimous. Mainly families like us opposed the rule, while even some older couples also did not agree with it. Over the next few weeks, as the court trial loomed closer, my wife and I attended a number of neighborhood meetings with the HOA to try and talk through our differences. each time being met with disdain and disagreement. Even when we brought supporters with us, it made no difference to the board. When discussion didn't work, I instead pinned flyers on the street corners to advise our struggle and warn the would-be opposition against very costly legal fees. Finally, that seemed to get the attention of the big-shot HOA president, Carter himself. He had gone thus far in avoiding the situation by delegating it to the board members or stating he is busy elsewhere. But luckily for us that the mention of legal fees seemed to have finally lit a fire under him. As the news had caught on to the story, Carter made a public statement to face the allegations against the HOA. "All they are doing here is scaring the good folks of this neighborhood. I don't even know why they want to bring up a child here anyhow. Most residents moved here to get away from kids. That's the point of the age restriction rule. We are all too old to be dealing with that." After reading up and researching to a great extent on the HOA and its rules, I found that in order to properly make their rule official, they needed written permission from every bank or lender that is associated to the homes within the neighborhood. In other words, every family that has a pre-existing mortgage agreement. And while the HOA board members apparently did send many letters to each of these banks, not all of them replied, which put them in a real sticky position, as despite their arguments, it meant they had no power on the matter, but that did not stop them from barking nonetheless. In what looked like another desperate attempt for support from the HOA, one of their attorneys appealed to the public, calling our lawsuit a ridiculous technicality and claimed that we were painting them unjustly as the bad guys when all the citizens here wanted to do was to be able to decide on their own where and how they wanted to live. As the threat of court was on the verge of tearing our community apart, it was raised that the HOA under no circumstances has the power to discriminate its citizens based on race, gender or religion. Frickin' somehow young people were exempt from protection, and this was actually an allowed thing to do. That was, of course, if they met a very specific set of rules and regulations first, which we knew when we challenged the HOA they were gonna do their best to meet and show us up, as otherwise they would be likely to lose thousands in damages and overall fees. Despite the fight going well, a number of my neighbors started to get cold feet when they were sent flyers detailing a similar case a few years ago, with all 20 homeowners of the original lawsuit being forced to pay out almost $10,000 each in drawn-out legal fees and damages, afraid that this could happen again. As I urged my neighbors to stay strong, we ended up getting support from a very unusual source: Sandra, former secretary of the HOA board of directors. In a statement to the press, Sandra showed genuine public sympathy with our case, which in turn caused her to be fired under the alluring guise of a quiet resignation. "I never would have moved here if I knew what was going on. The more I thought about it all, the more I thought, this really cannot be happening. We cannot do this to our homeowners." But even Sandra after that wanted to distance her from the case, not wishing to be drawn into a legal battle. She quoted, "Could get very costly." While disheartened from her disappearance, it did help to gather more public support from other HOA neighborhoods across the Tri-County area who flocked to social media to help out. As the weekly HOA neighborhood meetings continued, with varied attendance between the long sessions of heated bickering, more neighbors got angry about our plight and joined in with their own lawsuits, to the point that Carter, the HOA president, started cutting the meetings short when his temper started getting the better of him. I was not there personally for the last meeting, but word on the grapevine is that he was redder than a hot tomato. With diplomacy well and truly effed at that point, both sides had no choice but to fight it out in court. The proceedings lasted for months as their team of expert attorneys attempted to beat us to a war of attrition, but with the large number of lawsuits we had gathered, plus the crowds of public support that came to the trials, we managed to keep heart and stuck through it to the end. Nearly a year after the whole mess started, the judge and jury had come to their decision. The local HOA was found guilty of breaking the law and breaching their own rules of conduct and ordered to pay out an immense sum in damages to myself and the other homeowners. The HOA president quit the next day and sold their house. The last words we heard from the old grump were, "No way in hell am I going to be living in a neighborhood with a kid." But we happily waved him off as we made good with our celebrations. The board members also got changed up a bit, and we have worked well with their replacements ever since. We are coming up now to Amber's 3rd birthday and we still love this house. And with this, we have reached the end of the video. However, if you cannot get enough of my content, please check out my endless playlist, where you can find thousands of hours of content. In addition, please don't forget to subscribe to my channel to not miss any of my daily uploads. Thank you so much in advance, and I hope to see you again tomorrow.